Welcome back to MediaScience Myth-Busting. I'm your host, Philip Lomax, and I'm joined by the world-famous Dr. Dwayne Varan. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing the myth that smaller screens like those on mobile phones are less effective for advertising than bigger screens like television. So, Dwayne, let's jump right in.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a trip down memory lane. We've got to go back all the way to 2006. This is before the iPhone even existed, right? Before the iPhone existed. At the time, mobile phones were your Motorola Razrs, your Nokias, right? And advertising on a mobile phone was getting a text message, right? So it was really before any of this was really possible. And we decided to test what people were talking about in the future. You know, this idea of video phones. And people were very skeptical of this. They were, because your point of reference really was SMS advertising, right? So the question was, in the future, there may be video ads available on mobile phones, but what effect would they have? I mean, it's on a small screen. Who's going to watch an ad that's on a small screen? That was the assumption. So we decided to test it. So how do you test something like that, right? So what we did is we used an iPod Classic.
Wow.
So the iPod Classic looked like the iPod, and it had a little screen, and by 2006, you could actually have video on that little screen. And so what we did is we created basically these different experimental cells where you had TV shows that you could watch. We had short content, long content, and we also put ads in them. And then in another cell, we actually tested that on full screens as well. So the idea was now, what we were wondering is just how much inferior would this ad be when it was seen on a mobile phone. The TV was really just a point of reference for us. And the huge surprise was that the ad was just as effective when it was seen on a mobile phone.
Incredible, actually. I mean, if you think about how far mobile phones have come today, right? We use our phones, we're partially bionic now, right? Constantly in our pocket, constantly in our hand. It's how we connect with the world. So continue though, Dwayne. What else did you find in that study?
Well, the other thing that was really interesting about that study was we needed to understand why. Why do we see these results? And we had an interesting anomaly that we found, which was we studied the distance at which people held the phone. And we had a camera that was on the side so we could actually work out and measure accurately exactly how far they were. And what we discovered was that people held the phone at the distance that recreated the same relative viewing angle to their TV home viewing experience.
That's wild.
That's right. And in fact, we actually found that there was a magic screen size. And the magic screen size was 3.5 inches. And the reason that it was 3.5 inches was because if it was smaller than 3.5 inches, to create the relative viewing angle, you had to actually hold the phone a lot closer. And so in holding it closer, what you were doing is your arm was crossing a right angle. And there's a strain that happens on your arm when you cross the right angle, which meant that at smaller than 3.5 inches, it would only really be useful for short content because you wouldn't be able to hold it for long. So the big discovery that came out of this was that as long as your video screen was larger than 3.5 inches, and of course when the iPhone came out, that was the case, that you could actually watch a full program. And the ads that you watch within that environment would be just as effective because in a relative sense, it was actually exactly the same screen size.
I mean, within this experiment in particular though, Dr. Varan, what you were recreating was a television viewing experience on a small screen, right? What can you say about the architecture of viewing experiences as they differ between platforms and, of course, as we watch, streaming and, other formats on our mobile phone?
Yeah, so over the years, we have seen differences associated with them, but they're almost always because of different types of ad experiences. Like, for example, it could be that on a phone, you might have a limited interruption experience, but on TV, you might have clutter. In that particular scenario, you would expect the mobile phone to be superior. But the superiority is not because of the screen. The superiority there is actually because of the format, what you're doing with the screen, not the screen itself. In fact, consistently across the work that we've done, we have seen that the ad impact, other things being equal, when you control for everything, the impact is actually very similar. So here's results from a study that I did, for example, that we did where we looked at different frequencies of exposures. And what you see, again, if you look at the 3 different devices, desktop, mobile, TV, statistically, they're all absolute dead heat. So we don't see any differences. So this is why we say that, as a device at least, all screens are equal. So yeah, that's what we found in across that research.
I also think it's quite comical that the world is so cyclical in that SMS-based advertising is making a big comeback right now.
Well, and strategically this was very valuable. Indeed. So we're talking now about kind of like the research insights, but ESPN had a massive head start in the mobile space. Companies like Facebook lagged behind and had to play catch up later as they missed the boat and then had to catch up. But actually ESPN was always a step ahead. These insights really helped ESPN understand that mobile was going to be a big player for sports at a time when the rest of the market really didn't know that. So, the clients that we had who had access to this data really benefited from seeing this data even ahead again of the launch of the actual iPhone.
I mean, and most of our audience members wouldn't know that there was an actual ESPN mobile phone division.
That's right.
That spun up from this research that you and your team
at one stage
conducted.
There were even ESPN phones.
Indeed.
But that didn't prove to be so popular. But that's okay, because ESPN really learned a lot about mobile as a result of those experiences, which gave them a huge advantage in the marketplace.
And this is just another great example of how Disney had early access to this type of intelligence and was able to apply this intelligence within the marketplace and give themselves an incredible head start. I love these types of case studies, Dwayne, because they just demonstrate over and over again the value of research.
Absolutely, 100%.
So the myth that smaller screens are less effective for advertising than bigger screens like television. Dr. Varan, what say you?
Busted.
Busted. That was a great episode, and thank you for tuning in. Until next time, I'm Philip Lomax, this is Dr. Dwayne Varan, and thanks again to our audience.